Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Aquarius Rising Africa, wherever in the beautiful world you are. I see we have our Wednesday happy crowd, so welcome to everybody. See you all in the chats, and greetings and salutations to all of you in this beautiful world. And welcome back, Jessie. We missed you last week, and of course, hello, Mornay. Are you guys well?
We are. Yeah. Well, I guess I'll
Very
speak
good.
for Mornay. How are you, Mornay? You're doing well
I
too?
am well. Yes. Missed you last week as well.
Yeah, I missed
Great
you
to have
guys
you
too.
back. Yeah,
Thank
looking
you.
forward to this show we have today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know me, I've been chomping at the bit to start looking at this one here.
Yeah.
So, well, Jess, before we get going on Lieutenant Colonel Wayne McDonald's analysis of the Monroe Institute Gateway Experience, before we get into the juicy bits or the more detailed context of it, we're just going to kind of go through. Jesse's going to give us a rundown on all of that. But anyway, before we go there, how are you? Where have you been? Pray tell, what
Yeah.
have you got to tell us?
Yeah, I spent the past 2 weeks traveling and, just an amazing time. Started, not this past weekend, but the weekend before. George and I had the Redemption Tour in Orlando, Florida. And we were there with Gary Wayne, who was our special guest. That was amazing. Especially, I just want to put out a plug for Gary Wayne. For anybody, who's a high-end survivor, if you think you've had like MK Ultra or some of the Genesis 6 programs that you've been involved in, his book Conspiracy, yeah, I think it's Conspiracy of the Genesis 6, uh, is just an amazing resource, and he goes into such details about going into the history where those things came from, the beliefs about giants, Nephilim, um, you know, all the different theories that are out there for that. But he also gives an in-depth biblical perspective, pulls in lots of other ancient documents to kind of put together a fuller picture of everything that's revolving around that. So that was really amazing. And, we had lots of just interesting experiences. One of them was we ran into some weather witches at our anointing spot and, walked onto the road and, we're heading into the territory. And all of a sudden we had weather come out of nowhere, dark clouds, the wind started blowing. And the people with me are like, "Oh no, like, is it gonna rain?" And I just said, "Not today." And so we rebuked it, and it didn't rain until we got on the bus. So,
Well, there you go.
yeah.
Wow, that's
Um,
amazing.
so that was the first one, and then the second one, we did the first beautifully adorned retreat, and that's a retreat that's focused on helping people navigate their healing journeys. So it's really, packed with lots of different techniques, strategies, um, a lot of things that you can do to work through your healing process. So this was our launch, our first run. It was really neat. There's lots of interactive sessions that we do. I will have the course available on my website. However, it will not include the interactive sessions. So, I kind of explain them in the course, but it doesn't include that because those are more, very personal according to the people who are going through it. But we did lots of, you know, I guess it was just so freeing. I think a lot of people left there and felt that the Lord was really making progress, that, they were getting somewhere. Um, so very interesting.
Wow, that sounds amazing. As usual, I think we'll get the links from you. If there's are there any new links? And then we can post them in our description. On
Kingdom Come.
when is
Yep,
it on your website? Is it on your website already?
It'll probably be sometime June, July when that goes on the website.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Well, then we will keep you all updated.
Yes.
And on that note, I am very happy to say, Jess, we're going to be chatting about the Lieutenant Colonel Wayne MacDonald's analysis of the Monroe Institute Gateway experience. And of course, when I got hold of this document a little while ago, I was like, oh, wow, it's very frustrating for me to see how they've taken our God-given natural gifts, our natural energy, that as humans that naturally exist within us. Mm-hmm. But as we grow and expand and heal and become, I don't know, greater versions of ourselves, so our energy naturally expands. And what these guys have clearly done is they've taken it and they've completely manipulated it and used it for their own nefarious purposes and enhanced it and contorted it. Anyway, enough of me. I'm going to hand over to you so you can let us know your take on that.
Yeah, well, we're going to go through the document today that I feel is kind of like a pre-primer for the gateway analysis. And in that, I want people to keep a couple things in mind. First, we have going all the way back to World War II. We have Nazi scientists like Mengele who were set on working with organizations like Tavistock to put into process tiered programs that were focused on the studies of not only the physical body and torture to the physical body, but they also were focused on individual spirits and how do you torture the spirit? How does the spirit work? At a bigger picture, they were looking at something much, much more. Really, what the Luciferian Brotherhood wanted to know is how can we use the spirit of an individual as a weapon, whether that includes the body or doesn't include the body. So it's all about weaponization of the human soul. More of this you can look at, beyond the Gateway Project. This was so incorporated into the Luciferian Brotherhood at the upper levels of the military that we see even a lot of the beliefs that are in here coming out in Michael Aquino's trilogy, which is the Mind Wars series, where it starts where, first they're transforming the mind through mind constructs. The second book, Star, I think it's Starfind, focuses then on, the soul. How do they, get the soul to that operational point? Now, with that, you've got two things that happen. The focus is one on elevating those that they consider the elite. They want you to know how to, elevate yourself, both body and spirit, into that state of godhood. That's their goal, is for you to become a god. The second part of that is, for those who are not gods, they want to control the souls and be able to use those as weapons, even if it's in conjunction with the combination of two souls. So one, understanding, being able to wield the power, the other, being the weapon that they wield. So then it gets further, in his third book, where then he begins to break down, once in that higher state, how do you function? How do you transform humanity in that quantum level? So all of those are all interconnected as we begin to talk about these things. And at the core of it, really what you have is that intersect between the physical and the spiritual world. And many times as a child, what was that piece that connected the two? In the Luciferian brotherhood, it was the use of sex magic, that they would use sex and ecstasy to access the spirit of an individual, whether that would be to cause a traumatic event where then the child is going to disassociate. In that, um, their will is compromised. There's that weakness, that feeling of not having control. And in that, it makes their soul more vulnerable to be accessed. So I want to bring out, as we begin to talk about this, yesterday, May 23rd, 2023, there was an article released about child sex abuse by Illinois Catholic clergy spans the state and decades, the AG investigation finds. And that's by Jessica D. Onofrio, I think it is, and a few other individuals with her. So at the beginning, kind of just the premise of that report says, a long-awaited 5-year investigation has turned up hundreds of new horror stories of child sexual abuse at the hands of Catholic priests in Illinois, the Attorney General alleged on Tuesday morning. And I want to remind people that, it was back in 2016 when I had my first federal contacts where I was able to turn in the only tangible evidence that I had about my abuse and about, the Luciferian Brotherhood and satanic ritual. And that evidence was the ritual walls that were underground, that had the bloody handprints of every child that is born as a hierarchy child into the system. So, it doesn't surprise me that now things are starting to come out, about what they're finding with the Chicago area. And the report says that, or the article says, the report focuses on decades of old and new abuse cases in the state's 6 dioceses, which include Belleville, Juliet, Peoria, Rockford, and Springfield, and Chicago, which is known as the Archdiocese due to its large size. So there's quite a few areas in there. The central area that I reported on was, the Rockford area, as well as the military dumb base that's there under Chicago. It says nearly 2,000 survivors of the Catholic Church sexual abuse in Illinois were documented by state investigators, according to the Attorney General. Nearly every survivor exhibited some form of mental health challenge in the years after the abuse, the authorities determined. So think about that. So far only 2,000 that they've been looking into in these past 5 years, but they're making that formal statement that the abuse that these children and survivors experienced was so horrific that every single one of them exhibited some form of mental health challenge. I further propose that, as things start to be more revealed, we're gonna see more of the pieces fall into place. Acknowledging that mental health damage to survivors that have gone through that Chicago area is very important, because as we look further into it, I've brought forward that some of those who have been focusing on bringing healing to survivors and kind of being the forerunners and pushing, mental health, are in fact those that I knew, back in the 1980s to be part of what we called the breeder programs, part of the abuse that was happening sexually at those Catholic churches in the Chicago area. as those individuals changed positions from working the programs, like the ones we're going to talk about today, you know, they moved then into a position where basically they were maintaining the mental health of the individuals who had gone through those programs. So that's what we want to, some of the background pieces as we're starting to look into this, that we really want to keep in mind. I encourage people to read the rest of that article. Keep your eyes on the Chicago area. I think that as more stuff is, you know, more things come forward and is exposed, you know, I've asked for all of it to be exposed. So, you know, we're really doing kind of the legwork here. We're telling you what's coming down the pipeline. So as we
Absolutely.
get,
Wow,
go ahead.
that's actually really good news, though, Jess. That's really good news to for that to be, as you say, be exposed now, because it just shows that somebody's taking action, right?
Yes.
And
And let's give credit where credit's due. You know, I fully
absolutely.
believe that it's, you know, JT and his lovely wife. You know, who's been responsible for receiving the information that I sent in? Who's been standing alongside of survivors to help, you know, bring down this Luciferian brotherhood and to end human and sexual trafficking as much as possible? You know, really, DJT, he made that his number one priority. Um, you know, and he has been faithful to follow through with a lot of those things. And I think now, you know, the exposure is going to come. So,
Well, that is amazing news, and we will certainly be watching out for that and all these exposures that are happening right now, because I think they're happening in weird and wonderful ways. We've just got to be, as I always say, be aware and practice discernment, right? Always about discernment.
absolutely. All right. So as we begin, you know, the gateway project can be really kind of difficult to pull apart piece by piece. So that's why I want to start with this primer, because I really feel like it does a good job of kind of giving some of the background understanding, especially to the terms that we're going to be using. It's going to kind of, you know, help us to break down the methods and, you know, give us kind of the language that we need to be able to comprehend and begin to break down the bigger piece. So what we have is that, you know, basically this article, you know, focuses on, you know, some of the main areas where, at the highest levels of the military, they were beginning to do these soul projects, you know, which included what they called, or what they classified as, remote viewing. We've talked about how remote viewing can happen two different ways. The first way is the way that I experience it, which is that, you know, your spirit does not leave your body or separate from your body. So your body and your spirit stay intact, but you see into that spirit world, or hear or feel through visions, through dreams, through revelations. So that's the first way. The second way is that you do have, you know, where an event or a trigger can cause somebody to have their physical body separate from their spirit. And with that, you know, there has to be timekeepers, because in the spirit world, you have no time. So in areas where you see spiritual gates, you always will see these massive, large clocks. And there are certain areas around the world where they build purposely these large clocks, and that is for those that, you know, are working in the spirit world. They then can keep track of time that way, and, they know that there's a limit to how long their spirit can be absent from their body without that being God's work or the Holy Spirit's work, before
I
their
would just,
physical body deteriorates.
I would just like to ask you on that remote viewing. How do they teach the kids to do that? I fully get that they will choose gifted kids and obviously kids that are spiritually inclined for that, with that aptitude, if you will, in any event. But the way I would see this, because a lot of the SRA is done through a lot of trauma dissociation. So a lot of, I would imagine that they would maybe, because of the trauma, when the kids dissociate, and I hear stories about how they would then imagine flying on their unicorn while they're being horrified. I don't even want to say the words, but by whatever, molested, violated, tortured by whoever it is. So they would then come back, right? So
Right.
how is that the way they would teach a child? Is that involved? And if not, how would they teach a child
So
those skills without trauma? So where it's not trauma based.
there's no, I guess the first thing is to say that what they do is they create scenarios. And as they begin, to work with the different circle groups that they're going to set you up with, you have these experiences or situations that include multiple children. So, at its simplest form, my core circle involved 3 children, but it started out where there was 20 children that they were, um, had with us, and we're seeing, how we interacted together, how we experienced things. So within that group of 20 children, um, they would usually pick 1 or 2 that were the scapegoats. Those were the children that, the horrific experiences were going to happen to. So in that group of 20, we would watch the other children be abused. And as that happens, what they're watching for is who disassociates, who, kind of their body kind of blanks out and their spirit is entering into the spirit world. And you got to remember the people doing these initial, experiments are very trained in the spirit world. So they're able to see whose spirit goes into the spirit world and whose doesn't. And then they can confirm that, so for me, mine didn't go into the spirit world, but I could see clearly in the spirit world, you know, and with that, what you have happen is that the children who have that separation between the physical and the spiritual, they will have, let's just say, we'll keep it simple. They will have 2 sets of memories, but their physical, because they're disassociating and at first they're not trained, everything that they remember will only be what happened in the spirit. They won't remember the trauma that happened in the physical. But the children who don't have their spirit leave their body, they do remember exactly what happened in the physical. So those are the children that they have to then safeguard from breaking the silence or telling about what happened in that event. So they begin to set up things to regulate, to keep those children from talking about what happens in the physical. Because the spiritual, you know, if a child comes back and is telling people that, they're like, oh, it's their imagination, or, it's a dream that they had. They try to explain away the experience, but for those who, can remember details about the physical, there's no way to explain that away, right? So that's, they'll do different scenarios, different things, and then, the things with me, it was almost like there would be a, later it was official biofeedback that they would do, which means they're going to gather and document word for word what your experience was. So, that adds an element to the sickness of these individuals that, first they would create a scenario where children are having to witness other children be horrifically abused, whether that's physical, whether it's emotional, whether it's sexual or spiritual. And then, then they have to report back every detail of what they witnessed. And, then you're graded by how many details you remember. The more that you remember, the more esteemed you are. But then it also opens doors where, then you're brought into more and more situations that you have to give feedback about because they want to know the full extent of everything you can retain and remember. So that's a backdrop with this. So as we look at it, the article we're looking at today, it says, Lieutenant Colonel Wayne McDonnell was tasked with providing the underlying mechanics and potential for practicality of the Moreau Institute's Gateway experience. And I would propose that the Gateway projects were directly connected to projects I've talked about, like Scanante originally. And if I believe I'm correct in saying this, I believe that Scanante then became Gateway, and then from there, the Gateways turned into the Star Wars projects, and then the Voice of God projects. So ultimately, you've got all these little segments, but in fact, they're just different aspects of the exact same project and experiment stemming from the same, resource and background. So, and I can confirm that background goes all the way back to, the Nazi Michael Karkoc. It goes back to black magic. It goes back to Solomonic magic experiments with spiritual gates that were performed by many Luciferian brotherhood individuals, and then were, given to NORAD particularly, which is the military base there in Colorado. They shared it with Raytheon Energy. So then, our utilities became involved and became also financial backers in these experiments and projects. And at first, everything was done under the Department of Defense. However, after the big weapons display that I was involved in, April 24th of 1984, after that, the projects were removed from the hands and the funding of the DoD, and they were placed into the hands and under the funding of the DIA, which is our intelligence agencies. And at that point, many of the children that had been trained in those programs were then, utilized through the U.S. military in operational, or we'll just say they were made operational. So that's kind of the timeline.
How many kids are we talking? I mean, when you're talking about, and I know we've mentioned this before in one of our more recent interviews, and if you guys haven't seen that, I encourage you to have a look, where Jessie spoke about the weaponization of the kids in the military. It's actually quite horrific. So you went to the military display in 1984, where really the weapons were kids. Right. How many kids are we talking?
Well, I think, really we're talking from what, I've seen in the timeline is about 3 generations. You have, where the information first went into the hands of the U.S. military. So coming from World War II, so I would say it even goes further back, but we're just talking about, the connecting pieces that I have to my experience since everything was transferred into the United States. and the US military kind of became the basis for those projects and experiments. So, from there was a transfer where it came in late 1950s, early 1960s. So you have a generation of children from, that time frame, late 50s to the 70s. So that was one generation. Then you have the 70s to about the 90s. That was the second generation. And then you have the third one operating from the 90s to current. So I would say we have about 3 generations of survivors. And, exact program, um, you know, people, as I've heard others' stories, there's things where it's like, oh my gosh, that happened to me too. Like I wasn't the only one. Or there's little details where it's like, wow, that was, I witnessed that too. So it shows that, in these different generations, that they literally were running a program because you have the same situations, same scenarios, same experiences, yet the experiences can vary because you have different people with different spiritual gifts. You have people with different positions in that system. So the experiences can vary within that.
So when you're saying that the kids are then absorbed into the system, basically, after they trained, and I have two questions around that. Do these kids remember? And I'm asking you based on what you were saying earlier. Some kids like yourself would not dissociate from, let's say, traumatic situations. You'd be present. So they would need to safeguard you, and I would imagine some others like you as well, from spilling the beans. So do these kids who've been weaponized, from what I'm seeing and hearing, not all of them remember. These memories start coming up and surfacing at a later stage, but others have always remembered, and yeah, well, let me ask you that first.
I think there again, you have a variety. They have a variety of methods that they try to put into place to safeguard information for those who do remember. So it could be, that they've got, I guess I call them, that virtue squad that, is always listening, always watching. So, let's just say you were in a classroom and you start to try to tell one of your kids, oh, the teacher's a witch. Next thing you know, that teacher is going to come over and is going to, make comments about, whatever they say. Oh, there are no witches here. Witches don't really exist. Witches are fairy tales, like in the Grimm fairy tales. It's not good to, let your fantasies run free. I mean, they would make comments like that. Um, so they would do things that would be a reminder that you needed to comply to that code of silence. For others, who are dead set on telling, they may have to go to more extreme means where they're going to use drugs. They're going to try to, erase the memories from the surface level, so that everything is only in the subconscious. They're going to, basically put locks and keys on the access of those memories so that that individual does not have direct control over it. And then what happens is then they manage, any overflow of those memories into, kind of consciousness, particularly through dreams. That when the individual starts to have dreams or nightmares, they'll provide counseling and help, but they keep it in that state where the person believes that they're just having dreams or nightmares. They don't really come forward to say, hey, like, you've been through horrific stuff. I mean, if more and more the floodgates open, well, now they have to manage that, through mental health ability or mental health scenario. So,
which is, we've often spoken about the healing, the emotional healing and stuff, that is so needed when people are coming out of the system. But it's only recently we're starting to talk about the mental health around that as well. And that, I mean, it's such an important aspect to look at, because people, the more we understand how kids are programmed and the lengths to which these guys go to break them as much as what they can, we judge them by
even in
what
their
we see.
healing, even in the healing and the managing, it goes further. Like if the child's or now young adult is not, responding to kind of, we'll call it the sedation effect, where they're sedating, the conscious through medication, then, they go to the next level where, shock therapy became one of the biggest ways for them to treat the mental health. And in that process, that individual lost the quality of their mind, because the mind would become so physically damaged because of the shock treatments and therapy, that it really renders, so they move from, just lightly managing to, now they're going to put you in an incapacitated state just to keep you silent. Or, at that point, everybody thinks you're crazy, so it doesn't matter what you say. Um, say all you want, it doesn't matter. Nobody's listening because you're now crazy. You're in a mental health institute. And, so
And,
really the
in, and,
abuse just
invariably,
grew.
and invariably, they're all in cahoots with each other anyway, so the system is so well rigged to support these Luciferians, pedos on their missions. So it's up until recently. I mean, I know up until 3 years ago when we started doing this, the people were still not talking. It's such a blessing for me to see how many people have started talking and opening up, because truly, even though it's still horrific for the average person, everyone, to wrap their heads around, but it just seems more and more people are being able to wrap their heads around this now, which really, and when we're looking at people with mental health issues, I mean, I will always punt Alice Parola, who and her daughter Nikki and Joe, who've been doing regular shows on Aquarius Rising Africa. And I want to truly invite you guys, if you haven't watched those interviews with Alice Parola and her daughter Nikki and husband Joe, I really want to recommend that you do, because she's diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, also coming from very tragic background, pedophile, homosexual father, very abused, foster eventually. So of course then went on to have borderline personality disorder, but wasn't diagnosed for quite some time. But just the amazing healing that they as a family have been through, and how their daughter, I mean, gosh, this is a beautiful child. She's like an angel. How she went through this experience as a child with them, their experiences and how they assist others just by sharing their story. And we're seeing this more and more. So much of the stuff we're seeing now, people having this crazy talk. We must remember there's probably something that's occurred. That's my point. Let's never just judge what we see. Let's look deeper than what's going on. Sorry, Jess. Just wanted to
Absolutely. No, that's
add that
great.
in there.
Yeah, so when we start to look at, this, really, it defines what the Monroe Institute's Gateway Experience project was. And it says it was by means of a combination of Itzhak Bentoff's medical models and Pribbenbaum's theory of consciousness that he was able to attempt an explanation of how the brain hemisphere synchronization technique employed by Gateway was able to generate out-of-body experiences, henceforth referred to as OBEs, and other elevated states of consciousness. So, to break that down, basically, what is that saying? It's saying that the U.S. military was teaching, equipping people through different techniques, hemisphere synchronization techniques with the brain, deal specifically with light, frequency, sound, songs, vibration. So they're teaching through those things how to have the elevated out-of-body experiences and consciousness. So, that separation technique, and then how do you then experience the spiritual world? Recourse to certain theories in physics allowed him to attempt to explain how this hemisync procedure, whose biomechanics were elevated with the use of Bentoff's medical model, allows human consciousness to traverse time and space through the OBEs. With this, they brought in different technologies, which was the main purpose of CERN and ALICE, the Hadron Collider, to be able to create, the different synchronization at a mass level, so that, instead of just one or two, you could literally, because ALICE is connected to satellites and has the ability to connect all spiritual gates through the interconnects, you have the ability to, connect through a mass scale worldwide at one time, one place, even though you could have people at, millions of different places. Yet it provides that, that interfacing at one spot. So you can, yeah. So then it goes on. In the first part of this analysis, we will look primarily at the biomedical model and some related concepts and physics relevant to its operation in the Monroe Institute's Gateway experience. So he prefaces in discussion of these things by first looking at how biofeedback, hypnosis, and transcendental meditation employ distinct, though sometimes overlapping techniques to model behavior of the brain hemisphere, both individually and in relation to one another, in a way that is relevant to what TMI discovered about how to use its protocols and techniques to induce states similar to those achieved in these other disciplines and protocols, both in terms of results achieved and the causal mechanisms and properties by which they are achieved. So let's just put this into real time. What they're saying and what you have at the base of these experiments and projects is that you're going to have children, and you're going to have adults, which could include military, I would say primarily, that they're going to pull in, and they're going to use techniques. So that means that they've got trained specialists who are trained in physics and biomechanics, as well as hypnosis and other forms of magic and mind control. And those individuals are going to, come up with the protocols, the techniques, the different things they're going to do to achieve control of this individual's mind in the training, and, train that individual to be able to have these out-of-body experiences. If you're listening and you're from Area 51, besides, the different military bases in Maryland, which were kind of, the founders, or the key, the key place where they started the programs. The other big place where they, go more in depth into this training is there at Mars or Area 51. So the first thing, and think behind this, if you're a survivor and names are coming to you, write it down. As you enter into this training, you're going to have individuals who are doing hypnosis over you. Both Michael Aquino as well as Anton LaVey. They separated because of a fight that they had. Anton did not want to continue, with his knowledge of the spirit world and magic. He did not want to continue or enter into the projects and experiments. And that was partly why him and Aquino separated in the system. But both of them were masters at hypnosis. You can watch some of the interviews that Anton LaVey does, and even the ones Aquino does, and you'll see, a lot of times you'll see their hands kind of move across like that. Now, I'm not hypnotizing. There's further things that go along with it, but that often was a trigger. Like as they're talking to people, you'll see that finger and you'll see their finger move, and that's because they're hypnotizing the individual that, is doing the interview with them, or they're hypnotizing the audience. We can guard against those things. Go ahead.
Very interesting. Yeah, on this topic of hypnosis, I understand that they obviously, I mean, as we look at really just this mass hypnosis that's been carrying on for so many years, there's obviously different ways they do it. When they get onto stage and they kind of, call individuals and they hypnotize them to do, I don't know what, act like a goat or whatever. What is that? I mean, how is that triggered? How can they do that to one person?
Well, it's because with hypnotism, what you really have transpiring is that their spirit is asserting control over your spirit. And in the churches, we see this happen too. It's a little bit more evident, and but you'll see where they put their hand on your forehead over your pineal gland, which is really, where your spirit connects with God in the physical body, and receives, the light, the glory of God. So they usurp that authority over you, putting their headship over the glory of God, and that's where it starts. So, there's other things that they do to kind of gain that control, but that is a primary one. Every, child, your, initial, the, or let me put it this way in a better format. Children that go into the programs, they will always have something on their head. At first, when they're experimenting, they're going to take your temperature. They're going to put that right there, take your temperature. They're going to begin to do those connecting things that then in the spirit, they're taking control over your spirit. So they'll do your temperature. They'll put like headbands or headpieces on with a lot of electrical things over that area. Those are all the first things that they do. As the doctor's checking you out, they're going to, touch that area where your anointing is supposed to be. Now, what's interesting is that really it's the anointing, and that relationship with Jesus Christ that safeguards that. So, when I anoint people, I'll anoint their head, and then I've with several people I've done releases. The Lord told me to start releasing. So if you're out there listening today and you have had people that have taken that headship over your spirit, we're removing that headship right now in Jesus' name. And we're placing back in your hands the full authority and jurisdiction over your spirit body. And the Lord is giving that back to people. And we do that under the headship of Jesus Christ, who safeguards, you know, that where he alone is the Lord over our spirit. And we have that sovereign authority under his headship over our own spirit body. So, there's been a lot of restoration of that. Some of the things I've seen, at times with people that were going through the programs was, like if they all of a sudden would be, standing in a line, maybe they got out of, we're starting to have a little bit of behaviors. Immediately, whoever was monitoring their compliance would come over and would put that hand on the head. And then it was like their body would just surrender, like surrender that control. So we're stopping that today. Stop giving your control over to other people. It's just between you and God. And that's one of the first areas where people need that freedom from these abuses, is that to understand you do have that authority, and you have the authority over your spirit to begin to work through that healing process and that healing journey. You have the ability and the authority to break everything that was done over you, whether it was hypnosis or these other techniques. You can break that connection simply by asking the Lord to do it. So with the hypnosis, he explains the theory underlining the phenomena of hypnosis, according to psychologist Ronald Stone and the biomedical engineering models of Bentov. Hypnosis functions by allowing direct access to the sensory motor cortex and pleasure centers of the lower cerebral emotions. So again, that access is going to come straight through here. And, it's going to, so, the access is to your sensory motor cortex, so your physical movements. But we have to remember we're looking at two layers. So not only does it have, access to how your physical body moves and reacts, it has access to how your spiritual body moves and reacts. It also has access to your pleasure centers. So, those two things combined, control of the body and control of the body's pleasures, are key in this. I want to speak to that wound real quick since we're right there. That is part of the sickness of this abuse, is that, these individuals they're not necessarily doing, the sex magic for pleasure. They're doing it so they can access the spirit realms. In that process, you have children or other individuals, adults, where there is a sexual abuse that occurs, and an abuse to the soul through that occurs to your pleasures, where many are so hindered that they can't be in intimate relationships and enjoy the pleasure in those relationships, whether it's a friendship, whether it's marriage. They can't enjoy the full extent of that because their soul, their spirit, their emotions, their pleasures are so wounded through that abuse. So we're praying for the restoration of that as well, that that those those pleasures as God intended them to be would be restored. The article goes on where it says this disengages, so access to the functions and the pleasures disengages the right hemisphere of the brain from the sensory screening protocol of the left side of the brain. So God created our left side of our brain to kind of be a protector and a monitor of those things. So like say you go into a situation, as a child, your left brain starts functioning to protect you, saying, hey, this situation isn't right. An adult shouldn't be touching me or caressing me. Something is wrong here. But when they take control through hypnosis, it it blocks that left side of the brain from giving out the warning sign saying, hey, this isn't a good situation. Don't do this, right? And it allows whatever is being done to you physically or spiritually to be done by bypassing that filter.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
Part of the
Isn't
further
isn't
sickness, well, let me just
is
quick say one thing before you go on. Um, Part of that, then, what it does is it injures, um, it injures the individual experiencing the abuse because in that there's a willing component to it. It creates that willing component where you don't fight it. You don't, um, you don't stop it from happening. There's a part of you then that is surrendered to willingly allow the abuse that's happening against you, which then connects the demonic attachments of guilt and shame. All right, go ahead. What was your question now?
absolutely, it makes perfect sense. And when you're talking about bypassing the left hemisphere of the brain and sort of going straight to the pleasure zone, so to speak, that would then explain a lot of the use of drugs at the same time, because drugs would then have a similar type um, effect. And I'm sure, who was the guy that started making drugs, LSD or something? But all of these original drugs we've always heard have been started in some laboratories of the CIA.
Right?
Um, Makes us wonder why. And I know a lot of them, but that's again, I suppose, a topic for another day. A lot of the military, they were testing a lot of these drugs on the military guys as
Mm-hmm.
well. Um,
Correct.
to sort of obviously see what effect
To
that would have on
enhance,
them.
yeah, to enhance the
Yeah.
experience and to see what the full capacity um, of an individual's, mind, spirit, reactions, or abilities through that are. Yeah. So,
Wow.
in this, because the left side is decapacitated, um, that dominates the linear, the verbal, the discrete, and the sequential reasoning. So, like we said, it really puts your will into this a place where you're subjected, um, you're willing to allow the abuse to happen because all that left side function is turned off. And in there it says the non-critical and the non-verbal. So many times that's why, as we go through our memory work as survivors, we feel like we have no voice. We feel like there were things, we couldn't say, we couldn't yell out, we couldn't scream, we couldn't vocalize what was happening to us in that moment. And that's part of it is because they've bypassed that left side function of the brain during that. Um, so then it goes on, it says at this point, the right hemisphere, which predominate, or yeah, I'm sorry, the right hemisphere predominates the non-critical, non-verbal reasoning, no longer accepts what the left hemisphere communicates to it without question. So, when they use hypnosis, they can bypass that left side and, make the right side the dominating side, which then, is going to kind of function, but not as God created the brain to do so. But it says this allows access to a portion of the right side of the brain he refers to as the homunculus, which corresponds to various points in the body, allowing stimulation of the relevant portion of the cortex to generate responses in the body, or in the part of the body to which the stimulated component corresponds. So, again, they're going to, through suggestion, through word, because the right side isn't listening to the left side anymore. So now they're going to be the voice speaking to that right side. Therefore, like that's how hypnosis through suggestion, when they say move your right arm, the person moves their right arm. When they say go or do this, they go and do that. When they say act like a chicken, make it sound like a goat, the person does it because they're, because that left side is kind of shut off temporarily.
Wow.
Yeah. So we got 2 more quick sections for that. So the second way that they gain that control is through transcendental meditation. He explains that this process creates acoustical standing waves in the cerebral ventricles, which are then conducted to gray matter in the cerebral cortex on the right side of the brain, produced according to Dr. Sinala by altered rhythm of heart sounds that are occasioned by intensive meditation practice. So, this part is, really they're getting into the Kundalini magic. They're teaching people to regulate, to really hear within themselves their own heartbeat, and, from that to respond, to act, to come into that alignment with your physical and your spirit body, and then to be able to eventually control your spirit body and the separation of it from your physical through different forms of meditation or meditational practices. At the highest levels, this is even behind, even the blood magic that they do, where, they're going to kind of enter into that state of mental oneness with their spirit and their physical body. And then really it's only a matter of a thought. When you want to change your body into that physical state. So, for those that their spirit body doesn't leave their physical body, let's get to the hidden stuff here. Now we're going to talk ghost warriors. We're going to talk the top level Jedi. We're going to talk the top level occultists and Luciferians at the system, because they know that God made us physical and spiritual. They know that when you are trained at the top, that you understand how to change that physical body into the spiritual state. That in the twinkling of an eye, you can be both. You're still physical, but you change that matter at a quantum level, and you're able to, walk through walls. You're able to go through floors. You're able to levitate. You're able to be in the spirit world, present with your physical body in a spiritual state. So you're getting into another term for that would be the immortal stone. That those who have transcended or become fully illuminated understand how to walk within that glory of the physical and the spiritual body. So states of glory would be another way to put it, that God has created us to be in these states of glory in his presence. But if you're trying to bypass those states without God, and you're doing it for your own purposes in order to access those dimensions on your own, in order to be like God yourself, or to, as they would put it, to be a God in your own right, then it's sin. That's where it becomes the sin, and it begins to create offensive or offenses or hurts against your physical and your spiritual body and others' physical and spiritual bodies. Because they're doing it without God. And I want to quick say there are two biblical cases where it says that the Lord himself separated the body from the spirit and called up these individuals to heaven and left their body on the physical ground. The first one is Daniel, out of the book of Daniel, and the second one was the Apostle John in the book of Revelations. And in that, both reports, there was a taxation on the physical body, a taxation on their health after that occurred. And it says they were sick for many days. So, many occultists can report the same thing. When they have those experiences, there is a taxing on the body. Even for me, without my spirit leaving my body, when I have those strong visions where I'm seeing things, or when I'm in the spirit world in vision, when I'm done, there's a taxation on the body. I have to take time to rest. I have to take time to build up my immune system again. So that's a common thing that happens with this. And the occult in the training, especially in the military, we're very aware of this. And I believe that this is one of the main reasons that they are so fond of using adrenochrome. Because first, adrenochrome, I've talked about how they experiment with people starting at a young age. They find out how much adrenochrome you can have on a regular basis and function at that highest level of spiritual acuity, and where that breaks, where you then will go into a psychosis. So they know the amount that you can take. Now, in that, they want to make sure that you're functioning at your highest spiritual acuity. So that's the first reason they use adrenochrome. But then the second, I believe it's for this, that when you have those spiritual encounters, there's such a taxation on your body, your adrenals, that in order to keep you functioning at that level, they then have to keep you on adrenochrome, because your body in that taxation state, it has that natural process of putting the hormones and the chemicals out there, and then it will kind of pull back to give you time to rest, to give you time to recuperate. But they don't want to give you that time to rest and recuperate. So therefore, they then bring the adrenochrome from the outside source to keep you at that constant level. And for most children, hierarchy children, I've expressed that, the training usually is around, for me, it was 4.5 to age 7 were the intensives. Then it continued from 7 to age 10. But at that point, I pretty much was then going through the specialties. So, for those 5 or so years of your life, really they're targeting those hormones, those chemicals of your body, and keeping them maxed out at their highest, highest state.
Absolutely.
So the third thing that they use, besides the hypnosis, the transcendental meditation, is the biofeedback. This was probably, I would say, the majority of how I was trained. I just had no willingness to enter in through the other methods. I was a fighter, and I just wasn't going to do it. So with the biofeedback technique, this technique employs functions of the left hemisphere to make contact with relevant portions of the right. So rather than suppressing the left hemisphere, bypassing or distracting the activity of the former, they're going to utilize it. With this, they have external monitoring device alerts they have an external monitoring device alerts the participant when the left hemisphere has effectively made appropriate contact, allowing him to reestablish relevant brain pathways. So, this is where they're going to use light, they're going to use sound, they're going to use external indicators. It could even be individuals, it could be demonic spirits. They're going to give you feedback. So if you're going in the right direction, the feedback is going to kind of be positive. If you're not going in the right direction, you're immediately going to get a negative feedback. But in that, they play games where, if you're someone like me that memorizes things and you learn by rote memory, they switch it up. So, I've talked about like at the military bases, they had that wooden bridge that went over. It could change where, but let's just say what it was most of the time, a lava pit. And you've got a lot of heat, you've got a lot of fire coming up from that military base or from that lava pit. And what naturally happens with that heat, the wood is going to crack. The moment you step on it, you're falling through to your death. And they want you to, what they're wanting is for you to use your magic and your abilities to open a gate, a small gate that you can use to save your life. So you bypass falling into the lava. So that's the first round. The next time you go, it's got this metal wire around it at the rope, because they know your first reaction in that was when the wood broke, you grab onto the rope. And you're going to hang there for a while, as long as you can, because you don't want to use your magic, right? So the next time there's an electrical wire that's around that rope, so that when you go to grab that rope, you're now going to get shocked, which automatically will make you let go. Then you're free falling. Then you have to use your magic to save yourself. The next time, you're like, okay, I know if I grab that rope, I'm going to get shocked. So then they bring in, these hybrid creatures, which have the ability to shoot lasers. And, so you can't grab the rope. You now cannot, like, you're not safe just, hanging out there. And you've got these lasers coming at you. So you have to figure out ways to navigate all these implications, and things are constantly changing up, so that you become quick in your reactions. You're able to, think of all your possibilities. How do you get out of this dangerous situation? And those are some of the ways that they begin to, teach the children who are going through these programs how to, quickly, you enter a room, you quickly assess the entire situation. Within a second, every exit, every entrance into that room, every person that's there, who you have to keep your eye on, who your safe people are, and what you need to do to get out of that situation if something should turn bad. So that's what they're really training you to do. But what that does is it creates that hyperactivity in our minds, that then everywhere we go, we are constantly assessing everything around us, and, the danger, the risk, the ins, outs, what we need to do. And that's a hard
So
thing to
you
break.
so you constantly sorry, so you constantly being driven by fear. So you see,
Correct.
for me, this is very interesting because I've always maintained when we develop according to our natural human progression, as spiritually we expand, we become more aware, we become more aligned, these things naturally open up for us, right? But what these guys have now done is obviously taken what is naturally there, enhanced it, and turned it into something that is freakish almost. So
Yeah.
they're very clever. They can do that. But then, because it's not it hasn't occurred in its natural way, it now becomes something which is filled with fear. So it's now working for its
Well,
opposite,
yeah, and
right?
let's look at what fear is. Fear, is an emotion, but fear is also a spiritual attachment and a demonic spirit. So what
Yes.
have they done now? They've made that connection, that attachment between your emotion fear and the spirit of fear, so that now your emotion is controlled by that spirit. And part of that control then is to keep you in that hypervigilant state, so you
Mm,
never feel safe, you
mm,
never feel protected, and you are always on guard.
absolutely.
And that allows that
Absolutely.
spirit then to have control of you in every situation, everywhere you go. Um, you know, so
Absolutely.
the good news is that there is a cure, and I specifically use that word cure because we can have complete healing from that. The cure is simple. Scripture tells us how to deal with demonic spirits. The Lord has given us the authority to rebuke them and to cast them out. So if you're struggling with that as a survivor, the first step is to say, Spirit of fear, I remove your permissions over me. I remove your authority over me. And I rebuke you. I bind you and I cast you out in Jesus' powerful name. And from there, don't let it back. Don't let that spirit back in.
Wow. That's amazing. And it makes such perfect sense. Wow. As it I've read quite a bit of that document. Um, and again, obviously, because I'm very drawn to energy and understanding the human mind, consciousness,
Mhm.
stuff like that. It makes such sense as to why they use it in the way that they do. And as you say, really, at the end of the day, the objective is to instill fear, because
Yeah,
God, when you're in alignment with God, there is no fear. There is
correct.
no fear. There is only love. There's only acceptance. There's only compassion. There's only this amazing feeling that embraces you and wants to uplift you, is the only way I can describe it.
Right.
But when you're dealing with these guys and the way they've tampered with these energies, it has the complete opposite effect. As you say, you don't trust anyone, you're always on board. It's like you this overbred racehorse with 10 million times amplified energies what your body can really deal with, right?
Yeah,
So and then of course it has to then create an elevated state for you or for the
mhm,
child, right?
right.
So, wow, very, very interesting. Very interesting. And I love that, as you say, there is a way back, because the emotion of
Yep.
fear is what they connect to the spirit of fear. And that spirit of fear, which I always maintain, false evidence appearing real,
Mhm.
okay, is really just there to delude you. And I know that sounds weird, and I know that that's probably a whole new topic for a different day. But wow, amazing, Jess. I'm not sure, is there anything else still from your side for today? I know we are going to carry on. Uh,
Yeah, we're gonna carry on. So I think it would be good if, maybe um, we stop there for today, but I think there's a little bit more in this primer because it begins to just kind of talk about some of the protocols and procedures. So maybe we could start with that on our next show here next Wednesday. And I think we've got a 2-for-1 special next week. So
Yes,
maybe we
two
could
for
do,
one.
we could finish up, starting with the protocols and the procedures that are the background of the gateway experience. And then from there, we'll start working through the document itself. So, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff that gives us the background and the fuller understanding of, their weaponization of children and of people in the military. And I think in this, I feel as we go through this piece by piece, what the Lord is really, bringing us here, Mornay, Shanti, and myself to do is that with this, there's a healing release that's coming. That
Absolutely.
the Lord is, as we understand things, we then understand how to deal through it, how to walk through it, and in that
Absolutely.
people are going to find healing. You know.
I so wanted to say that. It's just, knowledge is power. When we know what they've been doing, then we can understand how to counteract that. Just
Right.
us knowing counteracts that. So when we come across people who've had this, and not just because it's not, we hear about the CIA doing this, right?
Mm-hmm.
What we really need to understand that the people, the CIA and whoever else have been doing this to, are your neighbors, your work colleagues, your family, your school teachers, your janitors, your politicians, your medical staff. These are people that are living with us in our environments that we need to be aware. So again, we now need to take this knowledge and apply it into our daily lives. And how do we do that? Jess, I'm going to actually ask you about that as well. How would you say when people start understanding, oh my gosh, this is what's been going on, and now I can now notice it's happened to kids at school, it's happened to my parents, it's happened to my neighbor. How does that person in that moment make a significant change?
Well, so with that, I think there's a key word that goes along with the word change. In order to get the change, we need to take a responsibility. And really, what that responsibility is understanding what is the authority that the Lord has given us. This is the premise of all of the courses that I'm really starting to put out, particularly the Rise of the Righteous and the Beautifully Adorned Healing Retreats. In that healing course, Beautifully Adorned, we break down, what does it look like to walk in that authority? How do we then take what we're seeing, the wounds, the traumas, um, the experiences that people have had? How do we get that change to take place? And, in that there's spiritual things that need to happen. But in order for those spiritual things to happen, there has to be acts of obedience to the
Mm,
Lord. So, I bring forward what those acts of obedience are. And I encourage everybody, when that comes out, to really take that because, even if if there's nothing in your life per se that you have to work through, say that you're not a survivor. Well, the course, it speaks to healing, across the gamut. So, you don't have to be a survivor to take this course. Maybe you've had physical ailments you've been dealing with your whole life. It's going to still address issues that are behind those ailments, and release that healing that the Lord wants to release. I've got people who take it just because they do work with others. They're invested. They're saying, "Hey, I want to walk other people through this process." In order to know how to walk with others through it, you have to understand it and you have to know what they need to get these releases.
And what they're dealing with, right? You have to know what
Right.
they're
And
dealing
so,
with.
the biggest part of, the beautifully adorned that you are not going to get anywhere else except for on the few, the shows that we did about the military bases and the programming here on Aquarius Rising. Um, you know, we break down. We break down how the enemy is using, and what he's using to program, how it's done. Um,
Absolutely.
and that's important when you're working with other people, when you understand that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow, guys, it's been a fantastic hour and a half, nearly 90 minutes, and we're on 333 viewers
Yeah.
in that moment. So I want to say to you, thank you so much. My guinea fowl are all standing outside, very, very impatient with me. I'm surprised they haven't started shouting yet. Usually at this time they're shouting at me. Anyway, Jess, I want to just say thank you. And guys, next week we on for a double show with Jessie. We will definitely continue on this vein. And I love and I so appreciate what you were saying there, Jessie, about watching our previous shows here on the military, the weaponization of the kids. And I'm going to ask Mornay specifically just to post those links in the chat or in the description. For those of you who might have missed them, in the last couple of weeks, we've done a lot on the military, the weaponization of kids, stuff like that. It's so important for us to see because I'm just looking at, I think Mary made a comment here earlier about, and how many people are also sort of being programmed to be triggered by false flags and things right now. You know,
Mhm.
I think there's such a that we under such a great onslaught right now, and doesn't matter which way they're going to try and whack us. If we are in alignment with God, we are not going to be whacked out of alignment. We will stand strong. Your roots are deep, like a tree. When the roots grow deep, there's no need to fear the wind. So, when you're in that space, we might get a little bit bruised and battered, but at the end of the day, we still have who we are. We're still connected. We're still in tune, and we're still doing what we need to be doing. So, really, and I love that you're going to be your course, Jessie, as well, coming online soon. And I know you've recently done another one, so maybe we can just post that link again
Yeah, it'd be the
for
kingdomlivingwithjessie.com.
Kingdom living.
So
yes.
far, we've got the foundations of kingdom living and the rise of the righteous and authority and dominion on there that are available. And then beautifully adorned will probably be coming sometime in June or July. And I do want to put out, just because I get a lot of harassment about this, there's a reason that the courses have prices to them. Um, these are college level advanced trainings that you're getting. So I'll stand firm in that. But with that, I also want to say that the majority of all my material I do offer for free as well. You're just not going to get it all, coordinated from point A to point B in one spot. So, like we go through in the beautifully adorned, we go through the programming that the military uses. That also, we did a base breakdown of that here on Aquarius Rising as well. So all of my materials are always made available and free. So
Yeah. And I think it's important. That's also a topic for another discussion, I guess, is just, why wouldn't we charge for our services? Everyone
yeah,
is paid for, anyone who goes to work is paid for their services. There's no reason why anyone, just because we're spiritual, shouldn't pay. That's all the more reason why we should be paid, actually. At the end of the day, that's my opinion. So I want to just say a special thank you to Linda and Joanne for our stickers today. Thank you, guys. Very, very generous of you. Really, really appreciate it. And on that note, and before Jessie closes us in prayer, special thanks to all our Patreons, guys. Really, 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 we so appreciate your support. It's you guys that keep the nuts and the bolts of this channel going, and we really appreciate it. You know, here in South Africa, I think our rand is sitting on about 20-1 right now. So it's very well appreciated. Thank you so much. And just before we end off, would you just like to close for us in prayer, unless there's something else you'd like to say?
No, let's pray. So, Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for this time together. We thank you that that you are bringing about those healings that our hearts have desired. My prayer for each one listening today, Lord, is that and that you will continue to just give me the words to say that will speak to their hearts. You know where each individual's at. You know their healing needs. You know the traumas, the challenges, the trials that they face that need to be bound up, that need to have the healing balm applied to it. So, Lord, we just invite you to come, and we ask that you would bring us to that place in our lives where we're not just operating with Band-Aids that we've slapped on our deep infected wounds, but Lord, bring that deep cleansing, that deep renewal of every part of our body, our soul, our will, our pleasures, Lord. Bring healing at those deeper levels in our lives. Especially to the children, especially to our veterans, especially to the survivors who have endured so much, Lord. We ask for this in your powerful name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you,
All right,
Jess.
blessings.
Thank you.
And thank you to everybody for watching. We will catch you again. Hey, when do we have... Don't we have book club on Sunday? And that's the next week, the first weekend of the month. Okay, I was like getting excited thinking it's the last Sunday. Then I remember.
So next week we've got Jessie for 3.
Yeah. And I want to just say thank you to the Patreons. So anyone want to join us for the Jessie Book Club? Okay, that's not the Sunday. That's then next week Sunday as well. And again, thank you to our Patreons. And for those guys who buy us coffees, you guys are so cool. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Really, really appreciate you all. Okay, everybody, God bless you all. Like, share, subscribe, please. Important information to get out there. See you soon.